So I want to read you some text written above a video uploaded to X earlier this month. First, the video is of a young man at a party surrounded by women, and the women are hitting on the guy behind the camera.
My friend likes your cameraman. Henry likes you. What's your name? I want to eat you. Tell us your name.
Yo, W, his name is Kirk.
Okay, here's the text because this is the important part. Quote, "Clavicular was mid-gestergooning when a group of foids came and spiked his cortisol levels. Is ignoring the foids while munting and mogging moids more useful than SMV Chad fishing in the club?" So, this got more than 30,000 likes, and I can honestly say that when it made its way across my desk, I understood maybe less than 1% of it. But it's part of an online ecosystem dominated by young men, largely built around an influencer named Clavicular, and a phenomenon he has mainstreamed called looksmaxxing. Looksmaxxers are essentially a community of young men that have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of maximizing their own looks, often at great personal costs, spending tens of thousands of dollars on cosmetic procedures or even taking blunt force objects to their own faces in the hopes of masculinizing their features. All of this to, as they say, ascend or become more conventionally attractive. At a time when so many young people, particularly young men, feel as though the future is foreclosed, that it is impossible to get ahead, we're going to bring you inside a world of young men leveraging their bodies in the hopes of doing exactly that. Aidan Walker is a writer and content creator whose work explores all kinds of online subcultures, and he joins the show today to talk about looksmaxxing, its central characters, and what the movement reveals about young men and our moment. Aidan, hi. It is really good to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me back, Jamie, to talk about the craziest, most disgusting corners of the internet.
I know you understand that post a lot better than I do, so you're going to have to translate it for me soon. But why don't we start with the central character here? He's a 20-year-old from Hoboken, New Jersey, named Braden Peters, or more commonly known as Clavicular, a name appropriated from the clavicle bone. He is a looksmaxxer, and I want to talk about that a little bit more with you in a moment, but Clavicular is a kind of protagonist on both TikTok and X and Kick right now. And so can you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, so Clavicular is, I think, one of the first looksmaxxers to really vault into a massive level of mainstream prominence. But this is an online subculture that's been around for, I'd say, at least a decade and a half. And he is a young man who, since he was like 14 or 15, has been posting on these, looksmaxxing forums and kind of following with the evolution of the internet, this niche. So he went from the forums to Reddit, to X, to TikTok, and now to live streaming platforms like Kick and Twitch. And so he's really become one of the most visible looksmaxxers. And he's mostly become famous for just doing insane stuff on camera, posting insane stuff. He lives his life in order to be the hook for a social media post.
What kind of insane stuff?
So he first kind of got big recently for going on a podcast interview and saying some politically kind of incoherent stuff about how he supported Gavin Newsom over JD Vance because Newsom is a 6'3" Chad and JD Vance is fat and ugly.
He's got a very short total facial width to height ratio. He's obese. Very recessed side profile, whereas Newsom is like 6'3" Chad.
So JD's very tall. JD's got to be 6'2", 6'3".
Gavin Newsom obviously mogs him to death.
So you're a Newsom head. You prefer Newsom to the vice president.
I'm just telling you who's going to win.
Then on a Christmas Eve, he hit somebody with his Cybertruck.
Oh my God! You probably just ran him over. Oh my God. Oh my God. Off the car. He was on the car. Oh my God.
Is he dead?
I don't know.
Hopefully.
He hung out at clubs shouting white nationalist slogans. Every week or day now, it seems like there's some new video of him, getting into a fight at a club or, saying some slur or picking up some girl or just the list goes on and on. and things he's claimed, like smoking meth to get hollow cheeks.
Ladies, you guys are really pretty. You want to do some meth?
Why do you do meth?
Well, because meth is very similar in terms of its makeup to something like Adderall, but it's got a little bit better psychoactive benefits. And meth also has a longer half-life. And the reason I also like it to be longer acting for a looksmaxxing context is stimulants cause appetite suppressants.
Or, just doing these very attention grabby things that I think are often illegal and are almost always self-destructive.
And when he talks about lookmaxxing, I mean, what is he talking about in that context?
Yeah, so looksmaxxing is the craft of maximizing the way that you look. It comes a bit, the slang word, from gaming culture and also like incel culture. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, there's a strategy you can take in the character creation process. Like you have a certain number of points that are arrayed across different categories. So you could have like combat points or like charm points or like, sorcery points or whatever. I'm not a big D&D player. And some players will just decide to, dump all of the points into like charm or whatever. And so the looksmaxxers, take a view of human life and are like, okay, we're going to dump all of our points, put all of our efforts into looking as good as possible and go to drastic lengths in order to do that, to truly max it and to truly, post and perform our maxing. And so Clavicular's whole thing isn't just that he's handsome, but that in order to become handsome, he's self-injected with steroids, apparently to the point of, making it so his body can no longer produce his own testosterone. And he's like 20.
I'm just on TRT.
What's TRT?
Testosterone replacement
Yes,
therapy.
yeah, okay. You hear about like 50-year-old guys doing that.
Yeah, well, it seems a little ridiculous that to optimize my testosterone levels to where they realistically should be as a male, I have to wait until I'm like 30 years old is like the common cope that you hear on the internet. And testosterone levels have been declining rapidly across generations. So I'm kind of just placing myself where we, evolutionarily should be.
Okay, so
And he's done stuff like hit himself in the face with a hammer.
My mom used to take these away when I was growing up because I was always bone smashing.
This is a principle that states that if you create microfractures to a bone, it's actually going to grow back stronger. So you're inducing this by bone smashing, whether it be with a hammer, with your fists, either or, to, grow your bones and get a more masculine, chiseled face.
Are there any downsides to hitting yourself in the head with a hammer?
No. No, as long as you have proper bracing, you're going to be fine. But that's what I mean. That's just like one example of something that you could do instead of political activism.
So it's just maximizing your looks through insane, radical methods.
And this is all in the pursuit of something they call ascending, right? And just what is that?
So ascending is when you have achieved, I don't think you can ever like fully max your looks. I think it's like the white whale ultimately, but ascending is when you have the sharper jawline, when you have the well-defined bone structure. And they'll often post these videos that'll be like pre-ascension. It'll be like a pimply faced, teenager. And then after the ascension, which is when they're fully looks maxed, and they look a bit like clavicular looks now. But the ascension idea is that you start out ugly and then you radically transform yourself into something different. And you talk about that process before and after.
Maybe I traded traded like some neurotoxicity for temporary leanness to ascend really quickly, because in my context, that was important to me. I was going viral on social media. I needed to get lean as quickly as possible.
Who is the target audience here?
That's an interesting question, because I think the target audience changes as it evolves. So one target audience is like so many kind of radical internet niches. They're trying to like shill, various treatments or brand partnerships, often oriented towards young men. So, I mean, the sponsorships will be like various supplement companies or maybe like gambling. Now he's kind of in this like club kind of scene now. Then in another way, I think the audience is just the massive regular people on the internet who will go, oh my God, what does, jester gooning mean? This guy's hitting himself in the face with a hammer and he'll get more attention.
Yeah.
So I think which audience he's aiming for, that looksmaxxers or anyone radical online is aiming for in general, kind of depends on the moment. But maybe the ultimate most loyal constituency is like young men who hate the way they look and hate the world they're in and are looking for an escape.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk about surgery. Like he's planning to undergo this $35,000 jaw surgery.
So I'm getting a double jaw surgery, and a couple weeks from now, they're just doing an osteotomy on both of the jaws and then advancing them forward.
Now, why are you doing that? You're a good-looking guy.
Well, because I want to look better.
I've seen him talk about makeup.
So let's do some of the looksmaxxes that are sus. All right, we got the eyelash curler. You know what I'm saying? Fraud that positive canthal tilt. All right, so here is what's called a waterline pen. And the idea with this is to create contrast between your sclera and your lower eyelids.
The language. Can we talk about the language? So I read that post in the intro there. Gesterguning, munting, mogging, completely unintelligible to me. And I remember the last time that you and I talked about the memification of violence in the wake of the Charlie Kirk's shooting. You talked about how part of the appeal was this way of communicating through memes that only people in that world would be able to understand. That really stuck with me. And is a similar thing happening here?
I think so. And it's not just the case with memes. Subcultures have always had slang. Different groups that feel on the outside of society for whatever reason have always had their own ways of talking, as a way of marking who's in and who's out, who's real and who's not. And I think in the case of this online slang especially, there's some overlap with kind of like incel culture for sure, which sort of makes sense in that it's about, men who think they don't look good and want to look better. So a lot of this stuff, like mogging, is a very like incel thing, comes from the abbreviation alpha male of the group, abbreviated to mog. So to mog is to like look better than somebody in some public environment.
When someone is just like outshining another person in like a photo or whatever. So if that comes along and happens to me, right, that's just kind of like almost biblical.
Have you been mogged by another man?
I've definitely been mogged, yeah.
Yeah. How does it feel to get mogged?
It's not a great feeling.
It feels bad. Yeah.
It's just
Okay.
And so it's really tied to this, like, I think this incel, what would I say, like zeitgeist in a way. And
Yeah.
it's very much designed to be opaque and to like, kind of lead you to ask questions about it. So in a way, it's a form of vague posting. It's a little bit of a hook to be like so opaque that people want to know what you're saying.
Vague posting. Yeah. I mean, like on the mogging stuff, like he walks around, right? And he kind of holds the camera up with himself beside somebody else. And then I guess he's saying he's better looking than them. So he's mogging them. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, it's both. It is that, and it gets to this point that, it's not so much like looking good in order to get girls. It's often like an intra-male competition or just like looking good for the
Yeah.
platonic spiritual ideal of being good looking, of being maxed.
Yeah.
But it'll be stuff like, he wants to show up at the club and just, have this aura of superiority that's physical looks, but also like a presence. And his fame now is a part of it. And there's been famous incidents, like you might have heard about the frame mogging of clavicular by the ASU frat leader, which
No.
so
No, I have not heard of that.
he,
Yeah.
he recently did he recently did my understanding of frame mogging might be imperfect actually, but clavicular recently did like a swing through ASU, Arizona State University, it has the reputation of being like a party school. And so he went through and was like at clubs, parties, and then this really like buff guy who the relevant thing is that he was extremely broad in the shoulders. So he also had kind of long clavicles, which, is important to the streamer nicknamed Clavicular. And this frat leader came into the frame with Clavicular.
Appreciate you. Crimson Tide. You got me by a lot.
And the frame mogging, in part, is because in that frame of the stream, the frat leader looked more masculine, looked more looksmaxxed, but it also was like with the aspect ratio, the width of this guy's shoulders kind of pushed clavicular to the side of the frame. And so my understanding is that he was frame mogged within the setting of the sort of camera thing by this guy with really kind of improbably broad shoulders.
You mentioned before that he and others like him got their start on these online forums, particularly one, as I understand it, where young men and boys would, among other things, upload images of themselves and ask others to rate their physical appearance as harshly as possible. Cosmetic surgery, as we talked about, comes up a lot. There's a lot of scientific terminology as well, mentions of upper maxilla, biochromial width, maxillary osteotomy,
all this medical jargon,
oh my God, interpupillary distance, canthal tilt, midface ratio, really niche pieces of human anatomy here. And then like the ultimate goal is to increase your SMV or sexual market value. Like, just can you walk me through just a bit more about what happens on these forums? Like, what are young men getting from them that they aren't getting elsewhere? Why do they keep coming back? They seem so harsh and brutal.
Yeah, so these are text-based forums. Look a little bit like 4chan. I don't think they work exactly the same way, but it's kind of, in a way, like a chat room. It's a very early internet thing that is still alive today. And often they have sort of a basis of anonymity, so people are able to post and kind of inhabit different kinds of personae that maybe they don't have access to in real life. So I think that's some of the appeal. It's kind of like a play acting. Then I think there's something about that, like, rate my looks, be as brutal as possible, that, it's a way of being vulnerable. And then there's a certain amount of like trauma bonding. Like, boys do this all the time to one another. They bully each other, like, boarding school, like gangs, all types of stuff. So I think that young men often put themselves in these competitive, toxic situations, and people get drawn into those dynamics, whether online or offline. And I think that there's also this sense, because it's online, that you're able to have like this other world that, in your day-to-day life, I think as a young man living, essentially anywhere in the world, you're not usually talking about canthal tilt or like maxillary distance, but suddenly you can have this sort of parallel universe where you get to be like a person that people listen to, maybe, or somebody that, knows this thing that other people don't know. And you get to adopt your own kind of role within that, and I think a lot of young men don't get to play those kinds of roles in real life, so that there's an appeal there.
One of the foundational texts for this world is a scene from the film American Psycho, which depicts the film's protagonist, played by Christian Bale, walking through his morning routine.
I believe in taking care of myself, in a balanced diet, and a rigorous exercise routine. In the morning, if my face is a little puffy, I'll put on an ice pack while doing my stomach crunches. I can do 1,000 now.
It's been viewed tens of millions of times on YouTube. The film, of course, follows this wealthy investment banker in New York City who doubles as a serial killer and violent psychopath. But stripped of context, the clip and character have doubled as a kind of tutorial here.
I always use an aftershave lotion with little or no alcohol, because alcohol dries your face out and makes you look older. Then moisturizer, then an anti-aging eye balm, followed by a final moisturizing protective lotion.
The character Patrick Bateman fulfills all of the lookmaxxer's central goals. He's in great shape. His face is what those in the community would consider to be aspirationally attractive. He's white. And just talk to me a little bit more about the importance of this character in the film, in this world that we're talking about.
Patrick Bateman is central both to looksmaxxing and I think to, modern meme culture and the right wing that's online in general today. I mean, Clavicular says kind of in the famous interview talking about Gavin Newsom and J.D. Vance that Gavin Newsom is American Psycho, looks like that American Psycho character. And so what that character does for them is, I think it's this model of totally the cold calculating alpha male. And like the movie itself is kind of a parody of that. Ultimately that character is delusional. Ultimately, he's hung up on these crazy status games, like how he looks, or, the exact kind of grain of the printed paper his business card is on. But there's this like ironic celebration of just being that focused on these specific attributes to the point that you become entirely antisocial. Like, you're doing things to perform better socially, to look better, to seem more prestigious, to have a better career. But the core sum of it is that it's a contempt of other people. It's not about, connecting with them. It's about mogging them. It's about being on top. It's about that kind of thing. So I think that's some of the central referent of it. And then I just think the visual language of that movie is kind of remarkable, and it's just become, such a meme. And there's so many edits of scenes of like Patrick Bateman walking set to, funk music on TikTok and stuff, that it's just in the water of online culture. It's one of the films that's probably most cited.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, one of the points there is Patrick Bateman's whiteness, right? And I guess clavicular's whiteness, for that matter, is very relevant here as well, right? His whole conception of beauty, there's eugenic style language kind of pervasive through this, talking about things like phenotype.
Even something like the mid-face ratio tracks back to ancient Greece, but a lot of it is, attractiveness surveys, scientists determining what is the most ideal measurement, right? And you take all these measurements and you come up with a total facial harmony score, and that kind of is able to be gauged on how attractive someone is.
Yeah.
And there's other things that play a role.
And this whole project is part of the online manosphere world that we've talked about before. And this is a guy that I think, like many in this space, is a line pusher. He's about violating norms, about being intentionally transgressive. So he says the N-word on his streams. You mentioned at the top of the show some of the really crazy stuff he's done. And so how would you describe the world of looksmaxxing's relationship to the manosphere?
So I think it is distinct, but it grows out of like the same swamp, you could say. Some of those terms for like specific looksmax facial features like canthal tilt or maxillary distance, I think come from phrenology. And there was kind of a right-wing meme around, ironically, sincerely, like making phrenology a thing again. So it definitely has these racist undertones, certainly kind of sexist undertones, or overtones rather, in both cases, I'd say. And ultimately, I think that it ends up kind of expressing a white male beauty standard, a little bit in the same way that, we understand that AI will sort of reproduce some biases that exist in the data set, because these guys are kind of doing the same thing. They're scraping the record of culture for these very metricized, optimized ways of looking good. And to the extent that, Western visual culture, Western digital culture reflects white supremacy, kind of privileges those beauty standards, I think that these guys will digest that and take that in, and sort of turn that into the basis for their thing, because ultimately they are, I think, as much as they express like a right-wing, anti-woman, anti-social dynamic, they're also an expression of this way of looking at the world, that everything should be counted, everything should be, categorized, everything should be downstream of how many views you can get, how viral it can go. So I think they express a lot of like the way algorithms kind of twist us.
Just on this politics point, you've brought up the J.D. Vance thing a couple times during this conversation, and I've tried not to kind of pounce on it because I have so many questions about it, right? Because the manosphere is generally connected to the right or the extreme right, and Donald Trump, right? And I'm thinking of like Andrew Tate and streamers like Sneeko and Aiden Ross and the Canadian influencers, the Nauk Boys, and Jordan Peterson, the former professor at the University of Toronto. But, in that conversation that Clavicular was having with Michael Savage, as you've mentioned, he basically says that he would vote for Gavin Newsom over J.D. Vance.
It's 2028.
I'm voting for Gavin Newsom.
You're voting for Gavin Newsom.
You can't be that subhuman.
So hold on.
I had really thought about these guys as connected to the manosphere and being kind of right in their politics. And he says that he's a Donald Trump supporter.
Politics is not about like good policy anymore. It's just about like rhetoric and presentation. That's like a very like obvious thing in my opinion.
Is that true?
I would say so. I would say that if it weren't for Trump's rhetoric and charisma, he wouldn't have won.
So he's a Donald Trump supporter, but according to him, J.D. Vance is subhuman and Newsom is a 6'3" mogger. Therefore, it's Newsom that has his vote.
Newsom being that much more of a mogger, and like having a president who's like fat and especially that young.
You think he's? I don't think he's fat.
I would say
he's a bigger guy for sure.
He's just like, it's just embarrassing. Like, how are you fat and you expect to like lead a country? You can't even be in shape, you know?
And I guess, is this just about looks? Like, I mean, help me make sense of that.
Well, I think if you watch the full exchange, definitely there's an element of like comedic timing going in. I think he's a performer and he's looking what's going to be the most entertaining, unexpected thing to say. And it's to endorse Gavin Newsom in front of the right-wing podcast host. But I think some of the deeper reason there, that insistence upon like, I would vote for Gavin Newsom because he looks better, is just this feeling that all that matters is that cold logic of what looks better, what maxes out the metrics more, right? That if you're going to go to this length of destroying your own face, destroying your career prospects for a normal life, destroying everything to look good, then why would you care about like politics? Why would that be separate? You know, this cold logic of, you know, the only thing that matters is how good a man looks. Clavicular wants that to reign supreme over everything else, over any, you know, belief set or whatever. So I think that's part of why he's endorsing Gavin.
The New York Times did this profile on him recently, and they said that he was bringing in $100K from Kick alone per month. And just how much do you think the financial stuff plays into the content that we're seeing? I mean, this is all very lucrative.
So I think the financial part is a big piece of it, as it is for everybody. And I think with any online content creator, you know, it's not just Clavicular making money, it's the security guards, it's the, you know, the whole ecosystem that surrounds him, people who clip him, you know, people who collab with him. But I feel like he's gotten famous so quickly, and it's likely extremely overwhelming. And he's been doing this looksmaxxing thing since he was like 14 and on these forums. And so I think his commitment to it isn't just purely transactional and about greed. I think it's ideological. But I do think the money is kind of like a major driver. But to a certain extent, there's like a Donald Trump quote. I think it was Trump who said this, that after a certain point, money is just a way of keeping score. And so money could just be another metric, you know, like view count, engagement rate, whatever. The amount of money you can rake in is, you know, proof of this, you know, project of looksmaxxing yielding benefits. You know, he's gotten to where he's gotten, made so much money, you know, been marked successful, you know, to the extent that one of the ways society marks success is by rewarding it with money through doing this insane thing that shouldn't work, you know, in the proper world of parents and teachers, but he's totally pulled it off.
Yeah.
I think that says something very dark about where we're at.
Well, just on the kind of purchase that it has, like after he made those comments about Newsom's press team uploaded a number of pictures of J.D. Vance appearing particularly disheveled. U.S. government's accounts on Twitter have also posted images citing some of the language mainstreamed by Clavicular, like the Department of War, which tweeted, quote, low cortisol locked in lethality maxing alongside the image of a smiling soldier. And so what does that tell you about the kind of reach and purchase that this has?
Well, I'd say the Department of Defense staffers, you know, certainly knew this slang before Clavicular was around. I mean, the guys running key parts of the U.S. governments are like 29-year-old incels who grew up on these forums. So I don't think it's new to them. As to Gavin Newsom, I think he's been experimenting and sort of trying every single online venue. And I think it's a good decision to kind of cash in on this moment and try to use it, twist it his own way.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think for better or worse, this is kind of the water we're swimming in. This is where discourse is, you know, after a decade of Donald Trump being the primary political figure of tons of people all around the world, you know, similar to him, kind of gaining cachet and clout. You know, I just think that's sort of how the table is set, you know, and we could wish it was otherwise, but to a certain extent, we have to play that game.
You've been talking throughout this conversation, and we've talked a lot on the show about how young men today are more isolated, are poorer, have less romantic prospects, are less educated than any time in modern history, that they are instructed to be providers and aspire to lead a household, but struggle to find gainful employment, and that dating apps and sports betting conglomerates uniquely conspire against them. This is a cultural moment which has produced looksmaxxing. And to that end, there was another really interesting moment in that Michael Savage interview where Clavicular is asked why young men just don't focus on their education and making money.
What's more likely? Someone to ascend from maybe, slightly below average to above average through looks maxing, or for them to achieve that desired amount of wealth for a supermodel to date them? It just seems like, we should be telling people to go the looks route.
Why?
Because it's easier. It's more realistic.
Is it cheap to looks max, or does it cost money?
It's just more achievable. People with...
Or put in other words, that changing your face is easier than changing your class positioning. And in that, he seems to be getting at something pretty inexplicable about the crisis of masculinity that so many spend a lot of time talking about that. And I wonder what you make of that as a young man yourself, that's so steeped in this.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I am steeped in this is because I think everybody kind of knows people who in high school or whatever experimented with that route, or everyone's had the posts that kind of want to feed you down that pipeline surfaced in their feed. And I've certainly encountered this content. I've studied it. I've tried to keep an anthropological distance. I'm sometimes darkly entertained, I think, the way a lot of people have been by the jester gooning and the ridiculous lingo of it all and the performativity and the show of it. But it does ultimately speak to something very dark. And I think it forces us to look at the right wing and look at the internet in ways that we haven't traditionally looked at it. Even someone like Jordan Peterson, years before this current point, but kind of arising from some of the same forces. He's a self-help guru, first and foremost, clean your room, 12 rules or whatever for living well. And Peterson, like a lot of these other influencers, kind of goes off the rails. If the fame, just the necessity to keep breaking the necessity to keep transgressing kind of drives them off the deep end. And they kind of go into these forms of self-destruction. And I think a lot of young men who look at the world and rightly realize that the game is rigged, right? That, the traditional economy no longer works. They've been given a horrible deal. Everything is either a debt trap or, some kind of scam. See this sort of as a way out, as a way of totally rejecting all this other stuff that they know is BS and going for something that feels so material and so true, which is the way you look does affect the way your life works out. But it's also important to get that there's, I think, still other options. And because this is often such a doomer conversation. The one thing I wrote down before that I wanted to be sure to bring up was there's tons of examples of people who experiment with this sort of thing and then get out of it.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of young teenagers, it's something they look into and then they go away from. And there's one especially inspirational 4chan green text, which is this genre of autobiographical stories that users will post, often beginning with "be me" as the first line on 4chan. And there's one that's very moving. You could Google it, Shrimp Guy 4chan. This guy who says, he began as an addict, an incel, and then his uncle introduced him to taking care of little shrimp that you put inside of an aquarium. And through the process of taking care of these shrimp, of cleaning the tanks so that they were healthy, of kind of having a female shrimp lay eggs and produce little shrimp, he sort of, all these opportunities opened to him. He started to see the world more clearly. And I think it's giving them something to care about and something that offers them a sense of agency, whether it's a shrimp tank or a hobby or whatever else. We just need to get the incels engaged. And I think that's very possible.
Eden, thank you so much for this. Before we go, I feel like we've said the word jester gooning several times during this conversation, and I think that we should just define it before we go. So, do you want to take a stab at it? It's pretty wild.
Okay, I'll try to do this as succinctly as possible. Jester is an adjective in these forms to refer to anything that's sort of in jest and not serious or sort of acting silly. And then gooning is a online subculture of hypnotic self-pleasuring to multiple screens of adult content. and just in general, some form of like kind of self-focused immersion that's totally cut off from others. And so my read of the jester gooning post is that clavicular is in a moment of kind of self-involved, just being silly for his own kind of sake and entertainment. And these foids, who are kind of a slang word for like unattractive women or unattractive people, are coming up and trying to get him, out of his jester gooning state.
Yeah. That sounds good. That sounds good. No, I don't want to make fun of it, because I mean, underlying all of this is very serious stuff that we're talking about today, but it is also patently ridiculous. So, it's tough,
I think
right?
it's important I think it's good to make fun of it too. It's good to mock him as the ASU frat leader did. And I think it's good to like demonstrate that, ultimately the most jester thing of all is to hit yourself in the face with a hammer. That's stupid.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Aiden, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. That's all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.